These two pieces of pie dough were baked in the same oven, at the same temperature, for the same amount of time, and yet they didn't brown the same way. The culprit? Your tart pan. Today we'll discuss how this innocent-looking piece of equipment can sabotage your tart and produce the dough that is pale and soggy. Have you ever wondered why a galette does not need pre-baking? You can put raw fruit directly into raw dough and it comes out crisp on the bottom. But a tart or an open-faced pie is a different story. For them, we have to pre-bake the dough, weighing it down with beans, or risk sogginess. But why? What's the difference? Yeah, questions like this keep me up at night. My problem with pre-baking is not just that it takes more time and effort. My problem with it is that the edges of the dough end up too dark and tough. So I was very excited when I learned about the freezing technique. Instead of pre-baking the tart shell, you freeze it for an hour and then fill and bake. This technique worked great for me. It produced much tastier edges without sacrificing the crispness of the bottom. But when my viewers tried this method, they got surprisingly mixed results. Some got a crispy bottom and some got a soggy mess. At first, I blamed it on the oven. I started freezing my tart shells right after I got my little Breville oven, and I loved how well it browned the top of the fruit. So that's the oven I've been baking all my tarts in. When I heard about my viewers' trouble, I tried the frozen dough technique in my regular gas Wolf oven and recreated their soggy bottom problem. Of course, it's not just the oven. When I bake in Breville, the tart goes on this black round sheet that came with my little oven. It browns exceptionally well. The fact that Breville's heating element is very close to the tart doesn't hurt either. Basically, I just got lucky with my equipment. If I would have tried the freezing dough technique before getting Breville, I would have ended up with a disaster. Of course, this disaster has a solution: a pizza stone and the high temperature. This produced a decent bottom in my big oven. It was slightly pale in the center, but at least it wasn't soggy. But the question still remained: why don't I have to jump through all these hoops for a galette? I bake galettes in a large oven with no stone and no pre-baking and still get perfect crispness. So I decided to set up a little experiment. I rolled out a piece of dough and cut it into two pieces. I put one piece directly on a parchment-lined baking sheet and the other piece on the bottom of my tart pan. I poked the dough with a fork to reduce bubbling, weighed it down with beans wrapped in foil, and baked for 15 minutes. Then I removed the beans and baked for another 5 minutes. And here's what I got. The dough that baked directly on the baking sheet browned way better. So the culprit turned out to be the tart pan. I googled for what's a typical material for a tart pan, and it turned out to be tin-covered steel, which is not nearly as conductive as an aluminum baking sheet. I'm sure professional bakers have figured this out long ago. That's why they use tart pans that look like this. They don't have a false bottom. They have no bottom. This allows the dough to sit directly on the baking sheet and brown well. The sides are still made out of steel, but they have little holes exposing the dough to more of the oven's radiation and promoting water evaporation. I got myself one of these rings and the results were fantastic. Here's a tart that I baked in my Wolf gas oven on a shiny baking sheet without a stone. I didn't pre-bake the shell, I just froze it for an hour and then filled and baked. Isn't this nice? This ring is smaller than my old tart pan, which was 11 inches in diameter. Most pie dough recipes produce 2 discs of dough, and each one fits an 11-inch tart pan. Of course, that disc would work for a smaller tart pan as well, but why waste the dough? Why not bake a larger tart if you can? When I started looking for the perforated rings, it was very hard to find one that was bigger than 9 inches. I finally found one, but it turned out to be too short. After trying a few options, I really liked this ring because it's 1 inch tall. It's only 9 inches in diameter, so instead of dividing my dough into 2 discs, I now divide it into 3 discs of 260 grams each. The temperature and time will vary based on your oven and your baking sheet. But here's what works for me using a shiny baking sheet and a frozen tart shell. 400 degrees in the bottom third of the oven for 30 minutes. And then 375 degrees for another 15 to 20 minutes, or until the fruit is bubbly and the top is brown enough to your liking. Okay, so don't throw away your beans just yet. There are certainly situations when you have to pre-bake your tart dough. If your pie or tart involves a custard, like a quiche, pecan pie, lemon tart, etc., there is no way to get around pre-baking. Custards prevent the dough from baking properly, so you need to bake it completely before filling. If you need to pre-bake the crust, dock it with a fork, crumple up a piece of parchment to help it mold to the dough, fill it with dry beans or some other weight. Make sure to get the beans into all the corners and bake in the middle of the oven at 350 degrees for 20 minutes or until the sides feel dry. Remove the beans, prick the bottom one more time and continue to bake to desired doneness. For non-custard fillings, you only need about 5 minutes to get the top of the dough dry to the touch. For custards, you need to keep baking until the bottom is completely brown. While I was messing around with all these tarts, I discovered a few more things that you might find interesting and helpful. Most recipes instruct you to roll out the dough, fit it into the tart pan, and chill it for at least 30 minutes before baking to reduce shrinking. That helps. But if you want to really reduce the shrinking, you can take it one step further. Roll out the dough and chill it for 30 minutes so that it does all its shrinking before it goes anywhere near your tart pan. If it becomes too stiff, let it soften at room temperature for just a few minutes, fit it into a tart pan, and chill again. This dough didn't shrink at all. Look how snug it is in my ring. Ignore my little spillover. I was trying to use up my leftover rhubarb and overfilled the tart a bit. It might look a bit messy, but it tasted scrumptious. You know how we poke the dough with a fork to reduce big bubbles? In my past tart videos, you'll hear me say that you should compress the dough with a fork, but not poke all the way through. I used to think that poking all the way through would result in leaking. Out of curiosity, I tried poking all the way down to the metal, and nothing terrible happened. Nothing leaked, because the dough closed up as soon as it started baking. So there is no need to be gentle. For about a year now, I've been leaving the dough overhang on all my tarts and trimming it with a rolling pin after baking. But this technique doesn't work quite as well on my new ring pan. Since it doesn't have fluted edges, cutting off the dough overhang after baking turned out to be more challenging. Although keeping the overhang on the outside of the tart made the sides of the tart thinner and more delicate, with my new tart ring, I preferred the version where the dough was trimmed to 1 inch and folded back inside the tart. Press this dough firmly into the ring to thin it out and secure it to the walls. This side dough stayed up well after baking and came out nice and straight. People often ask me why I keep the overhang at all. Why not just run a rolling pin on top of the raw dough and cut it off before baking? The problem with that technique is that it often results in shrinking sides and overflowing filling. I hope this video helps you produce beautiful tarts. Filling ideas are in the description below this video. Keep in mind that all those recipes were developed for an 11-inch tart pan, To make them fit a 9-inch ring, multiply all the filling ingredients by 2/3. Here are more thought-provoking culinary videos for you to check out, and if you are ever in the Boston area, maybe I'll see you in one of my classes.